I remember the smell of her hair when she was a baby. It was a mixture of lavender and that unique scent that only a child who is deeply loved carries. My husband, Ricardo, used to say that she was the missing piece in our puzzle. We didn't just want a daughter. We prepared a world for her. Our house in the suburbs wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a sanctuary of security. I remember the white lace curtains I chose myself, the hand-painted nursery, and the way the sun hit the wooden floor in the afternoons. We were the portrait of a successful family, but more than that, we were a family that believed in the power of more. If she wanted a doll, we gave her the dollhouse. If she wanted to travel, the world was at her feet. Ricardo worked until his hands were tired, building a legacy. He was a man of few words, but giant actions. Every cent he earned had a destination, our daughter's future. We never thought we were spoiling her. We thought we were protecting her from the hardships we had faced. I grew up with nothing, and Ricardo had to fight for every piece of bread. So, when our daughter was born, we made a silent pact she would never know what it felt like to want something and not have it. She was our miracle, our sunset, our reason for breathing. I remember her first day of school. She looked so small in that uniform, her hand tucked firmly inside mine. I felt a pride that burned in my chest. I looked at the other parents and felt that we were doing it right. She was polite, she was beautiful, and she had everything. What could possibly go wrong when a child is surrounded by so much abundance and care? We didn't see that. By removing every stone from her path, we were making her legs weak. We didn't see that by giving her everything, we were teaching her that nothing had value. The dinners were long and filled with laughter. Ricardo would tell stories about the office, and I would talk about the garden. She would listen, smiling, or so it seemed. I look back at the photos now, and I try to find the exact moment the light in her eyes changed. Was it at 10? At 12? Or was it always there, a hidden shadow behind the smiles we paid for? We bought her the best education, the best clothes, and the most expensive hobbies. We thought we were building a fortress. We didn't realize we were building a prison of expectations that she would eventually want to burn down. The change didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing erosion. It started with a silence that was different from the peaceful quiet of her childhood. This was a heavy, cold silence that settled over the dinner table like a fog. I remember looking at her across the expensive mahogany table we had bought just for our family gatherings. She was there, physically present, but her mind was miles away, wandering through territories I no longer recognized. Her phone became her sanctuary, a glowing portal to a world where we weren't invited. Every time I asked how her day was, the answer was a sharp, monosyllabic whine that felt like a door slamming in my face. The first real chill, however, came when she started choosing them. The people she called friends suddenly changed. They weren't the children of our neighbors or the kids from the private academy anymore. They were shadows. Boys with cold eyes and girls with a hardness in their voices that made my skin crawl. I remember the first time she brought a boy home, not the one who would eventually end our lives, but the ones who paved the way. They didn't look at us with respect. They looked at our house, our furniture, and our cars with a predatory hunger. When I tried to talk to Ricardo about it, he would pat my hand and say, "It's just a phase, Maria. She's finding herself. We gave her a good foundation. She'll come back to us." But I felt it in my soul she wasn't finding herself. She was losing herself in the thrill of the forbidden. Then came the lies. Small, insignificant lies at first. She said she was at the library when she was at a party. She said she lost her expensive watch when she had probably sold it or given it away to someone who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as her. I started finding things in her room that didn't belong in our world. Scraps of paper with names I didn't know, the faint smell of cheap cigarettes clinging to her designer clothes, and an attitude of pure, unadulterated disdain. It was as if our love, our provision, and our very existence had become an insult to her. She began to treat the best of everything we gave her as if it were trash. I found a silk dress I had bought her for her birthday crumpled in the corner of her closet, stained and forgotten. It broke my heart because that dress represented 3 days of Ricardo's overtime. To her, it was just a rag. The distance grew into a canyon. She would spend hours locked in her room, the sound of muffled arguments on the phone vibrating through the walls. When she did come out, she looked at us with a mixture of pity and hatred. I tried to reach out. I tried to buy her more things, thinking that maybe a new car or a trip to Europe would bring back the girl who used to sit on my lap and tell me her dreams. But the more I gave, the more she retreated. She didn't want our world. She wanted the thrill of the gutter. She wanted the bad boys, the ones who spoke in threats and lived on the edge of the law. She saw our stability as boredom and our protection as a cage. I remember crying in the kitchen late at night, wondering where I had failed. Ricardo would find me there, and we would hold each other to people who had built a kingdom only to realize their princess wanted to see it burn. The tension in the house began to have a physical weight. It was no longer just about silence. It was about the air becoming unbreathable every time she walked into a room. I remember a specific Tuesday, a day that should have been ordinary, but it remains etched in my memory like a scar. I had prepared her favorite meal, lasagna, the way my grandmother taught me, with the sauce simmering for hours. Ricardo had come home early, clutching a small box. It was a gold bracelet, a just-because gift, a desperate attempt to buy back a smile that had long been absent. When she finally came downstairs, she didn't even look at the table. She was dressed in dark, oversized clothes that hid the girl we knew, her eyes heavily lined with black makeup that made her look like a stranger. "I'm going out," she said, her voice devoid of any affection. Ricardo stood up, holding the box. "But honey, your mother cooked, and I have something for you." She didn't even glance at the gold. Instead, she let out a short, mocking laugh. "Keep your shiny toys, Dad. I don't want your guilt gifts." That was the first time Ricardo's voice trembled with something other than love. "It's not guilt, it's love. We give you everything. he shouted, and for a moment, the walls of our perfect house seemed to shake. She turned around, her face twisted in a sneer I will never forget. You give me things because you don't know how to give anything else. You're boring. Your life is a repetitive loop of work, pay, and sleep. I want to feel alive. And then he appeared. A black car with windows so dark they looked like voids pulled into our driveway. The music thumping from inside. It was a violent vibration that rattled my china cabinets. A young man stepped out. He didn't come to the door. He didn't introduce himself. He just leaned against the hood, lighting a cigarette and staring at our house as if he already owned it. He had a scar near his eyebrow and a look of absolute arrogance. That was the boy she chose. Not a boy from school, but a boy who looked like he had seen the inside of a precinct more often than a classroom. Who is that? I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. His name is Enzo, she replied, her eyes suddenly lighting up with a dangerous fire. And he's the only real person I know. She walked out the door without looking back, leaving us standing in the foyer of a house that suddenly felt far too large and far too empty. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the street, waiting for her to return. Ricardo sat in his armchair, the gold bracelet still in his hand, looking at it as if it were a foreign object. We were losing her, not to another city or a career, but to a darkness that we didn't understand. The days that followed were a blur of escalating conflict. She started coming home at dawn, her eyes glazed, smelling of things I didn't want to name. Whenever we tried to restrict her, to take away the keys to the car we bought her, or to cut off her credit cards, she would transform. She wasn't our sweet daughter anymore. She was a cornered animal, lashing out with words that cut deeper than knives. She called us pathetic, empty, and materialistic. The irony was staggering. She hated our money, yet she used it to fund her life with Enzo, to buy him things, to keep him close. We were the bank for her rebellion, and the fools who thought that by staying quiet, we could keep her safe. I remember finding a bruise on her arm once, and when I asked about it, she didn't cry. She just looked at me with a cold, terrifying pride, and said, "This is what passion feels like, Mom. You wouldn't understand." I began to pray. I, who had always seen faith as something secondary to hard work, found myself on my knees on the cold marble floor of our master bathroom, begging a god I had ignored for years to bring my daughter back. But faith, in those dark days, was indistinguishable from denial. Ricardo and I entered a silent pact of delusion. We looked at the empty chairs, the stolen jewelry from my nightstand, and the unexplained disappearances of large sums of cash, and we chose to believe her lies. When she said she lost her diamond earrings, we bought her new ones. When she said Enzo was just misunderstood and needed a second chance because his family had failed him, we opened our wallets and, eventually, our doors. The floor felt cold, but the blood was warm. It was a terrifying contrast that my mind, even in its dying state, couldn't stop processing. I watched from the ground, my cheek pressed against the fibers of the rug, as my daughter, the girl I had taught to walk, The girl who scraped knees I had kissed 1,000 times stepped over Ricardo's lifeless arm as if it were a fallen branch in a park. There was no flicker of grief in her eyes. There was only a frantic, greedy energy. "Check the floorboards, Enzo," she urged, her voice hushed but sharp. My father was paranoid. He used to hide the emergency stash under the loose board near the vanity. She knew. She had spent years observing us, not with love, but with the cold eye of a thief casing a joint. Every secret we had, every safety net we had built for her future, she was now dismantling with a crowbar. Enzo laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl even as it grew cold. He kicked Ricardo's side to move him out of the way. I tried to groan, to scream "Don't touch him," but all that came out was a wet, bubbling sound from my throat. The betrayal wasn't just the bullet. It was the way she talked about us, in the past tense, while we were still there, bleeding out. She spoke of our lives as if they were a burden she had finally dropped. They were so predictable, she said, tossing a handful of gold watches into the bag. Every Sunday dinner, every lecture about responsibility. God, I hated the smell of this house. It smells like failure, wrapped in expensive perfume. Enzo paused, pointing the gun back at my head as he saw my hand twitch. "Should I finish it?" he asked, his tone as casual as if he were asking if he should turn off the lights. My daughter looked down at me. For a second, just one heartbeat, I expected to see a spark of the child she once was. I expected her to say no, "That's my mother." Instead, she sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. "Don't waste the ammunition, Enzo. She's not going anywhere. Let her watch. Let her see us leave with everything they thought would buy my soul." They began to move through the house like a whirlwind of destruction. I heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs, the crystal vases, the framed family portraits, the history of our lives being shattered one by one. It was a ritual of desecration. They weren't just stealing, they were erasing us. She came back into the room, one last time, wearing my favorite silk scarf, the one Ricardo gave me for our 20th anniversary. She looked at herself in the mirror, above our bed, the bed where her father now lay dead, and she blew a kiss to her own reflection. "We're going to the coast, Enzo," she said, her voice filled with a sickening excitement. "We'll burn through this cash, and then we'll find another way. No more rules. No more Mom and Dad." I watched their shadows retreat down the hallway. The front door slammed, and for a moment, the house was silent again. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of before. It was the silence of a tomb. I lay there, my hand inches away from Ricardo's cold fingers, watching the moonlight fade as the clouds moved in. The betrayal was complete. We had given her the world, and she used it to buy the gun that ended ours. Sacrifice became our daily bread. Ricardo started working even longer hours, not for the legacy anymore, but to pay for the debts she claimed she had. We knew, deep down, that the money was going to Enzo. We knew it was going toward drugs, or guns, or whatever dark world they were building together, but the alternative was too terrifying to face. Too To admit that our daughter was a stranger was to admit that our lives had been a failure. So, we chose to be the martyrs of her rebellion. I remember the night Ricardo brought Enzo into our home for dinner. It was a sacrifice of his pride that I could see in the way his jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. He needs a positive environment, Maria, Ricardo whispered to me in the kitchen, his voice hollow. If we welcome him, maybe she won't feel the need to run away. It was the ultimate denial. We sat at that same mahogany table, serving a man who looked at us with nothing but predatory calculation. Enzo didn't use the silver cutlery correctly. He didn't care. He sat there with his tattooed hands and his restless energy, mocking the very air we breathed. Our daughter sat next to him, her hand perpetually in his, looking at him as if he were a god. She didn't see the way he looked at our safe in the corner of the office. She didn't see the way he measured the distance between the windows. Or maybe she did, and that was the most painful thought of all. I started finding excuses for her behavior in psychology books, in articles about troubled youth, in anything that could take the blame away from her heart. It was the bad company, it was the age, it was the pressure of having too much. We sacrificed our peace. Every time the phone rang after midnight, my heart would stop. I lived in a state of perpetual flight or fight, waiting for the call that she was in jail or worse. But she was always home, or so she made us believe, sneaking back in through the garage, smelling of copper and smoke. We became shadows in our own home, walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong word would send her spiraling back into his arms forever. We were paying for our own destruction, one loan at a time, one forgiven lie at a time, hoping that our bottomless love would eventually act as a bridge. We didn't realize we were just building the pyre they would use to burn us alive. Denial is a powerful narcotic. It numbs the instincts that should protect us. I remember one afternoon when I was cleaning the guest room, the place where we allowed Enzo to stay just for a few days because he claimed his parents had kicked him out. As I moved his leather jacket, a heavy, cold object fell to the floor. It was a handgun. My heart didn't just race, it stopped. I stared at that dull metal, that instrument of death, and for a second, the veil lifted. I saw the danger. I saw the end. But then, I heard my daughter's laughter from the garden, a sound so rare and so precious, and I chose to lie to myself. I picked up the weapon, hid it back in the pocket, and told myself it was for protection. I sacrificed my common sense on the altar of a peace that didn't exist. The night it happened, the air was strangely still. There was no thunder, no cinematic warning, only the oppressive heat of a summer night that felt like a wet blanket over the house. Ricardo was already asleep, his breathing heavy with the exhaustion of a man who had spent the last months trying to fill a bottomless pit with his own sweat. I was in the kitchen, drinking a glass of water, staring at the dark garden, when I heard the front door click. It wasn't the usual clumsy entrance of a teenager coming home late. It was silent, methodical. I saw them through the reflection in the window. My daughter and Enzo, they weren't fighting, they were whispering, their heads close together in a conspiracy of shadows. I saw Enzo reach into his waistband and pull out the same cold metal I had hidden back into his pocket weeks ago. But this time, he didn't look like a rebellious boy. He looked like a professional. And my daughter, she didn't look afraid. She reached out and touched the barrel of the gun, her fingers tracing the cold steel with a terrifying tenderness. She whispered something that made him smile, a sharp, jagged smile that cut through my soul. I should have screamed. I should have run to the phone. But my legs were made of lead. I watched as they moved toward the stairs, toward our bedroom, with the grace of predators. I followed them, my heart screaming no, while my mouth remained frozen. I stood at the threshold of my own bedroom and watched the betrayal unfold in the moonlight. Ricardo was still asleep. He didn't see her go to the safe he had opened so many times to give her whatever she wanted. She knew the code. Of course she knew it. We had given her everything, including the keys to our ruin. She opened it with a steady hand. No trembling. No hesitation. She began to dump the remaining cash, the family heirlooms, and the title deeds into a black bag Enzo was holding. But it wasn't enough for them. It was never enough. Enzo looked at Ricardo, then at the bag, and then back at Ricardo. He mouthed a word I couldn't hear, but I saw my daughter's response. She didn't look away. She didn't beg for her father's life. She simply stepped back, giving him a clear line of sight. "It's the only way to be free, Enzo," she whispered. Her voice was as cold as the marble in the bathroom where I used to pray for her. "They'll never stop trying to control us with their love. If they're gone, it's all ours. Everything. No more lectures. No more guilt." The first shot was a deafening roar that shattered the silence of 20 years of marriage. Ricardo didn't even have time to wake up fully. His eyes opened for a fraction of a second, reflecting the betrayal of the person he loved most in the world, before the light went out of them forever. I screamed then, a sound that didn't feel like it came from a human throat. They both turned. Enzo raised the gun toward me, his face a mask of indifference. But it was my daughter's face that killed me before the bullet even left the chamber. She looked at me with a profound, icy boredom. She wasn't even angry. She just wanted me out of the way, like an old piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor of her new, dark life. "Sorry, Mom," she said, her voice flat and hollow. "You just loved me too much." It was suffocating. Then came the second roar. The world turned into a kaleidoscope of pain and heat. As I fell to the floor next to Ricardo's cooling body, I saw them. They weren't crying. They weren't panicking. They were laughing. They were stepping over our bodies to get to the rest of the jewelry. I felt the blood soaking into the carpet, the expensive, hand-woven carpet I had been so proud of. My last sight, as the darkness closed in, was my daughter putting on my grandmother's diamond ring, admiring how it sparkled in the moonlight, while her father's blood stained the hem of her designer dress. The floor felt cold, but the blood was warm. It was a terrifying contrast that my mind, even in its dying state, couldn't stop processing. I watched from the ground, my cheek pressed against the fibers of the rug, as my daughter, the girl I had taught to walk, the girl whose scraped knees I had kissed 1,000 times, stepped over Ricardo's lifeless arm as if it were a fallen branch in a park. There was no flicker of grief in her eyes. There was only a frantic, greedy energy. "Check the floorboards, Enzo," she urged, her voice hushed but sharp. My father was paranoid. He used to hide the emergency stash under the loose board near the vanity. She knew. She had spent years observing us, not with love, but with the cold eye of a thief casing a joint. Every secret we had, every safety net we had built for her future, she was now dismantling with a crowbar. Enzo laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl even as it grew cold. He kicked Ricardo's side to move him out of the way. I tried to groan, to scream, "Don't touch him," but all that came out was a wet, bubbling sound from my throat. The betrayal wasn't just the bullet. It was the way she talked about us, in the past tense, while we were still there, bleeding out. She spoke of our lives as if they were a burden she had finally dropped. They were so predictable, she said, tossing a handful of gold watches into the bag. Every Sunday dinner, every lecture about responsibility. God, I hated the smell of this house. It smells like failure, wrapped in expensive perfume. Enzo paused, pointing the gun back at my head as he saw my hand twitch. "Should I finish it?" he asked, his tone as casual as if he were asking if he should turn off the lights. My daughter looked down at me. For a second, just one heartbeat, I expected to see a spark of the child she once was. I expected her to say no, "That's my mother." Instead, she sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. "Don't waste the ammunition, Enzo. She's not going anywhere. Let her watch. Let her see us leave with everything they thought would buy my soul." They began to move through the house like a whirlwind of destruction. I heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs, the crystal vases, the framed family portraits, the history of our lives being shattered one by one. It was a ritual of desecration. They weren't just stealing, they were erasing us. She came back into the room, one last time, wearing my favorite silk scarf, the one Ricardo gave me for our 20th anniversary. She looked at herself in the mirror, above our bed, the bed where her father now lay dead, and she blew a kiss to her own reflection. "We're going to the coast, Enzo," she said, her voice filled with a sickening excitement. "We'll burn through this cash, and then we'll find another way. No more rules. No more Mom and Dad." I watched their shadows retreat down the hallway. The front door slammed, and for a moment, the house was silent again. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of before. It was the silence of a tomb. I lay there, my hand inches away from Ricardo's cold fingers, watching the moonlight fade as the clouds moved in. The betrayal was complete. We had given her the world, and she used it to buy the gun that ended ours. I didn't die. That was my first punishment. To wake up in a hospital bed, tethered to machines that hummed like the ghosts of my past, knowing that Ricardo was already under the cold earth. I survived the bullet, but I didn't survive the sight of my daughter in the courtroom. That was the real confrontation. It wasn't a movie scene with dramatic screams. It was a clinical, freezing realization of what I had birthed. When they were finally caught, hiding in a cheap motel at the edge of the state, they didn't look like lovers on the run. They looked like rats. But even then, in her orange jumpsuit, my daughter held her head high. When I was wheeled into that courtroom to testify against my own flesh and blood, the silence was so thick it felt like it would suffocate everyone in the room. I looked at her, hoping for a tear, a tremor, a sign of the girl who used to be afraid of the dark. Why? I managed to whisper, my voice a broken rasp from the damage the bullet had done. The judge didn't stop me. The whole room waited for her answer. She leaned forward, her hands cuffed to the table. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked directly into my soul with eyes that were hollow pits of indifference. "Because you were a cage, Mom," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone, echoing through the halls of justice. "You and Dad, with your perfect life and your best of everything. You thought you were buying my love, but you were just buying a front row seat to your own execution. You didn't give me what I wanted. You gave me what made you feel like good parents." Enzo sat next to her, smirking, sensing his power over her even in chains. But I didn't care about him. He was a parasite, a common criminal. She was the one who had guided his hand. The prosecutor showed the evidence, the fingerprints on the safe, the security footage from a gas station where they were seen laughing and counting Ricardo's blood-stained money. I watched her watch the video. She didn't flinch. She watched herself as if she were watching a stranger in a movie, a heroine she admired. "You killed him," I choked out, the pain in my chest far worse than the lead that had pierced it. "He loved you more than his own life. He was weak," she snapped back, finally losing her cool, her face contorting into that same sneer I had seen on the night of the murder. "He was a slave to his work and a slave to you. I chose Enzo because he doesn't have a master. We were going to be gods. You just didn't have enough in that safe to pay for our throne." The confrontation reached its peak when the defense tried to claim she was manipulated by Enzo, a victim of his bad influence. I saw her eyes flash with genuine anger, then not at the crime, but at the suggestion that she wasn't the one in control. She stood up, rattling her chains, and shouted over her own lawyer. "He didn't make me do anything. I chose this. I'd do it again. I'd pull the trigger myself this time just to see the look on your pathetic, praying faces." In that moment, the gallery gasped, and even the guards stepped back. The veil was gone. There was no good girl left to save. I realized then that my sacrifice, my prayers, and my denial had all been for a ghost. The person standing there wasn't my daughter. She was a predator we had fed until she grew strong enough to hunt us. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel love. I felt a cold, barren emptiness. The confrontation ended not with a bang, but with the sound of a gavel and the realization that I was looking at a monster I had decorated in silk and lace. The courtroom felt like a meat locker, chilled by an air conditioning system that hummed with a clinical indifference to the tragedy unfolding within its walls. I sat in my wheelchair, my body feeling like a collection of broken porcelain, held together by surgical tape and sheer willpower. The prosecutor, a man with eyes that had seen too much, began to play the audio recordings from the police station, the first interview they conducted with her after the arrest. I had to hear her voice again. Not the voice that used to sing in the shower, but a voice I didn't recognize, sharp, impatient, and devoid of a single tremor of regret. "Did you love him?" the detective's voice asked on the tape. There was a pause, a terrifying silence that lasted 5, maybe 6 seconds. Then her laugh. A dry, rasping sound. Love is a word people like my mother use to justify their boredom. My father was a bank account with a heartbeat. Once the account was drained, the heartbeat was just a noise. Why do you keep asking me if I'm sad? I'm not sad. I'm annoyed that we didn't get across the border faster. In the courtroom, I looked at her as that recording played. She wasn't looking down at her lap in shame. She was looking at the jury, studying them, trying to see which one she could manipulate with a stray tear or a tilt of her head. She was a chameleon, a predator adapting to a new environment. When the forensic pathologist stood up to describe the trajectory of the bullet that killed Ricardo, she leaned forward with a sickening curiosity. She wasn't recoiling from the gore. She was analyzing the efficiency of the kill. The confrontation moved to the witness stand when Enzo's lawyer tried to pin the entire plan on her, calling her the Lady Macbeth of the suburbs. I watched Enzo, the boy she had traded our lives for. He looked at her not with love, but with fear. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was just a tool in her hand, a weapon he thought he was wielding, while she was the one pulling his strings. "He's lying!" she screamed, her voice breaking the courtroom's decorum. "He's a coward!" He wanted to run after the first shot, but I made him stay. I made him take the rest of the jewelry. He's nothing without me. She was proud of it. That was the most agonizing part of the confrontation. She didn't want to be seen as a victim of a bad boy. She wanted the world to know she was the architect of her own father's murder. She wanted the credit for the carnage. I looked at the hands I used to hold the hands that had guided Enzo's aim, and I felt a physical sickness that no medicine could cure. She had taken everything we gave her, the education, the confidence, the sense of entitlement, and she had weaponized it against the very source of those gifts. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. I saw the jurors' faces change from pity to pure horror. They weren't looking at a troubled girl anymore. They were looking at a void. My lawyer leaned in and whispered that we should leave, that I didn't need to hear the rest. But I couldn't move. I was anchored there by the weight of my own failure. I had spent 20 years building a person, and I had ended up with a monument to cruelty. The confrontation wasn't between a mother and a daughter. It was between a creator and a creature that had decided its creator was obsolete. The sentence was life. No parole. When the judge's gavel hit the wood, the sound felt like the final nail in the coffin of my former life. I watched as the guards led her away. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. She just adjusted her handcuffs as if they were a piece of jewelry that didn't quite fit her taste. Enzo was taken out through another door. his face pale and broken, but she walked with a terrifying, icy grace. Returning to the house was the hardest part. The police tape was gone, but the shadows remained. I refused to sell it. Everyone told me to leave, to find a small apartment, to start over. But how do you start over when your soul is buried in the backyard? I spent weeks scrubbing the floors. They told me to hire a professional cleaning crew, but I needed to do it myself. I needed to feel the coldness of the floor where Ricardo had died. I needed to see the stains fade, even though I knew they would always be there in my mind, a permanent map of the night my world ended. The silence in the house is different now. It's not the silence of peace, but the silence of an empty cathedral. I walk through the halls, and I see the ghosts of who we were. I see the little girl with the lavender-scented hair in the corner of the living room, and then I see the woman with the cold eyes and the gun in her hand. The two images don't fit together. They clash and shatter, leaving me with a headache that never goes away. I sold all her things. I gave away the designer clothes, the expensive electronics, the furniture we had picked out together. I wanted every trace of her existence removed, yet every corner of this house screams her name. I visit the cemetery every morning. I talk to Ricardo. I tell him about the garden, about the weather, about the mundane things of a life he no longer shares. I never mention her name. It's our silent pact, even in death. I think he knows. I think he watches me from wherever he is, his heart still breaking for the woman who survives and the daughter who destroyed us. People at the supermarket look at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I am that woman, the mother of the girl who killed her father. I can see them whispering behind their hands, wondering what I did wrong. What hidden rot I planted in her that grew into such a monstrous tree. I received a letter from the prison ones. I stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it. I expected a plea for forgiveness, a confession, a sign that the walls of a cell had finally cracked her shell of indifference. But when I opened it, there were no words of regret. It was a list. She wanted me to send her more money for the commissary. She wanted her high-end skin creams and her favorite brand of chocolate. She ended the letter with, "You owe me this much, considering you're the reason I'm in here." I burned the letter in the fireplace. As the paper turned to ash, I realized that there is no aftermath for her. She is exactly where she wants to be, the center of her own twisted universe, still demanding, still consuming, even from behind bars. I am the one who is truly imprisoned, trapped in a life built on a foundation of lies and a love that was never returned. I am sitting on the porch today. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and dying orange, much like the colors of my own heart. I have lived more years in this silence than I care to count. People often ask me if I have forgiven her. Forgiveness is a word for people who haven't lost everything. I don't forgive, but I have reached a state of cold, hollow acceptance. I accept that I gave birth to a shadow. I accept that my love was not a shield, but a target. I look at my hands now. They are wrinkled, spotted with age, and they shake more than they used to. These are the hands that held her, that fed her, that worked so hard to give her a life of luxury. And yet, they are empty. I realized, far too late, that you cannot buy a soul. You cannot manufacture character with expensive gifts or private schools. Some people are born with a void inside them that no amount of motherly devotion can fill. She was one of them. She chose the darkness not because she was forced, but because she found her reflection in it. I still dream of Ricardo. In my dreams, he is always young, always smiling, always coming through the front door with a bouquet of flowers or a new toy for the girl who would eventually betray him. I wake up and the bed is cold. The house is still. I have turned her bedroom into a storage space boxes of old tax returns and broken appliances. It is a fitting metaphor for what she became to me. Something broken, something stored away, something that no longer serves a purpose. I don't visit the prison anymore. The last time I went, she looked at me through the glass and asked if I had sold the house yet, because she wanted to make sure her inheritance was being managed properly. She still thinks she has a claim to a world she burned down. I have found a strange kind of peace in my solitude. I volunteer at a local shelter, helping children who actually have nothing, no parents, no money, no best of everything. When I look into their eyes, I see a hunger for love that my daughter never had. They appreciate a piece of fruit or a kind word. It makes me realize that our abundance was our curse. We gave her everything, so she valued nothing. I spend my evenings reading by the fireplace, the same fireplace where I burned her letters. The story of my life isn't a tragedy of loss. It's a lesson in the limits of love. You can give your life for someone, you can sacrifice your sanity and your soul, but you cannot make them love you back. You cannot change a predator into a lamb. I will die in this house, eventually. And when I do, there will be no one to inherit the silver or the gold. I have left everything to the orphanage. I want our hard-earned legacy to go to those who know the value of a hand held in the dark. As the light fades from the porch, I close my eyes, and I don't pray for her anymore. I pray for myself. I pray for Ricardo, and I pray for the children who are still waiting for a love that doesn't expect a price.